first of all, I would differentiate a couple different situations in developing the relationship with the board chair. In 2 out of the 3 systems that I worked in, I came in as a brand new CEO, brand new to the system, brand new to the city. So talking about that first, you can actually start developing that relationship, in my opinion, very first moment you meet them in the interview process. And I think that's actually kind of an interesting process to get to learn their style. And anymore, different transit authorities have different formats for interviews. A lot are moving to the public process where interviews are done in public. And that shows you a completely different side of the board chair. So I think the first experience I've had that really was very helpful was learning as much as I could about their style, how they presented information, how they received information, during that interview process. And then once on board, really having a very important and detailed upfront conversation with the board chair to understand how they came to be in the organization, how they rose up through the community to get to that point of prominence, trying to get a better understanding of what issues or specific issues that they're interested in, maybe operations, maybe finances, maybe capital projects, what level of comfort they have being the face of the organization. Some of the chairs I've worked with have been very excited about participating in press conferences or presentations to large community groups. Frankly, others have preferred to be sort of the behind-the-scenes person who allowed the CEO or encouraged the CEO to take on that role. And understanding their role in the community. Most board chairs have achieved a certain level of leadership in the communities in which they live, where they've had long histories, they've had histories of leadership position, and that comes with many advantages, many relationships, and it can also come with some baggage. So, being upfront about where they're strong and maybe where they are not as strong in building those community relationships. And then the other experience I've had is you can learn a lot about how a board chair operates in talking to other members. You can learn about how they relate to other members of the board by talking to those members, as well as senior staff who've had dealings with the board chair. I think a key thing for me early on in those relationships has been reaching agreement on how they prefer to get their information. Some chairs like email, some chairs would prefer that you call them, some prefer just an informal, let's grab a cup of coffee once every other week or something like that. So just trying to gain an understanding of how they like to be communicated to. And then finally, I guess the other point I'd make is I would always come into an organization communicating to the board chair that I'm coming in as a public transportation professional. I can help to give you advice on how to run a transit system, but I'm really leaning on you to help me to learn the community, the politics of the community, and the important relationships that I need to build. So I think for me that pretty well sums up, how I come into an organization, and I'm interested to hear what Nat has to say about it.
Well, Steve, very interesting insights as it relates to board chair CEO relationship, and this is, I think, a very important subject. As you were speaking, I was reflecting on the need for flexibility as a CEO with your chair of the board, because when I start reflecting and looking back in terms of my tenure and serving as CEO on 3 different agencies over about a 14-year period, I had 8 different board chairs, and each of those individuals were uniquely different in terms of the level of communication that they wanted from me as a CEO or their involvement in the governance of the agency, ranging from someone who wanted to know what was going on minute by minute versus a board chair who wanted to be briefed once a month just before the board meeting on any issues that they should be aware of. So I think the flexibility in terms of your communication style and leadership style is critical. I don't think that the chairs have the time or maybe even the desire sometimes to adapt to your style. So I've always worked hard to be flexible and recognize those nuances in terms of communications. I think, in looking at the chair's position and managing your communications with the chair, I've also kept close tabs on the other board members that are serving on that board. In that time frame of 14 years, having 8 different board chairs in some organizations or some communities, that board chair could change over every year or every 2 years. So I think I always work to not just have a strong relationship with that chair, but obviously with all board members, but focusing on the next and up-and-coming chair and making sure that they were properly oriented in terms of taking over the leadership role. Another thing that I think I would like to raise is the importance of the board secretary. And in those instances, the one constant in all three agencies was the board secretary. They were there before I joined the organization. They were there after I left the organization. And in a lot of cases, they hold a lot of, I would say, hold a lot of the opportunity to manage that relationship with the board chair. They have a large role in it. And in fact, in some cases, they can be an extension of your office in terms of managing the chair, making sure the chair is properly briefed and informed of the activities that are going on, and having a sense for the board chair prior to, particularly when you're coming into an organization, that board secretary can really help with your fitting in and working with the board's culture and history and their preferences. I've had, I think, an opportunity over the years to work for some great board chairs. Each of them brought different strengths and, in some cases, areas that they needed, that they were challenged in. But at the end of the day, they bring different skills and different talents, and you need to leverage those skills and talents. And Steve, I'd be happy to hear about some of your more detailed experiences in terms of particular board chairs, and what were your experiences with those challenges?
Well, as you mentioned, Nat, while you were speaking, I was also taking some notes and kind of chuckling to myself about shared experiences. And I wanted to echo one point that you made, is the experience of that board secretary, particularly coming into a new organization. The issue you raised, too, about making sure that you adapt your style to the preferences or the style of the board chair, I think is absolutely key, and I think it's a very important skill set that the CEO has to bring to the table. Perfect example is when I worked with the Capital District Transportation Authority in Albany. I had the pleasure of serving under two board chairs who were distinctly different in style. First chair I worked under actually became the third chair I worked under there as he returned as chair, a gentleman named Dave Stackrow. Very strong public presence, enjoyed representing the agency, public events, media events, you name it, terrific public speaker, very organized, very thoughtful person. So being able to get to know that with Dave very early on, and frankly working with our agency, our marketing folks, to create opportunities for him to speak in public, always made us look good when we did it, and frankly made him feel good. And as a CEO, it never hurts to have your board chair feel good about what they're doing. Other gentleman that I worked with as chair in Albany, and I would also say he shared this trait with the chairman that I worked with in Pittsburgh. The other chair in Albany was a gentleman named Jim Cappiello, really expert on the political background in New York State and particularly in Albany County, which was the center of our service area. Jim preferred to stay out of the spotlight, preferred that the CEO take that chief spokesman role. On the other hand, when it came down to sitting down and mapping out strategy on how to get things worked out with state government or in the local political structure there, Jim was not only a master of knowing the personalities and the history, but could look and think 3 and 4 moves ahead of time to make sure that we had the best strategy moving forward. I mentioned earlier the importance of, even in the interview process, kind of getting to know as much as you can about the board chair. And when I got to work with a gentleman named Jack Brooks, who chaired the board for my entire term in Albany, and I guess, Nat, maybe I didn't wear out my board chairman quite as quickly as you did. I think I've worked with really only 5 chairs in the 3 systems that I've worked in over a fairly long period of time. In the interview, I thought it was very curious. The first time I met the board members in Pittsburgh, it was a panel interview. All 9 members of the board were participating in that process. And every single member asked numbers of questions, follow-up questions, responded to answers that I would have to questions. Through the course of the entire interview, that chairman, Jack Brooks, didn't say a single word. On the other hand, I could tell by his facial expressions, I could tell by the level of attention, the fact that he was writing copious notes. He was paying very detailed attention to what I was saying, but frankly also what all of the other members were saying, and their facial reflections and those types of things. Then when I was able to have a follow-up conversation with him one-on-one as part of that interview process, it was very obvious that he paid close attention, and he had a take from what I said and what every member said in that process, and it was a very valuable take. So what I sort of learned in that process early on, and the take I had, and it ended up being confirmed in our still very strong relationship, I consider him a close personal friend to this day, was that a guy who really didn't want to speak out first, didn't want to be the one who was out in front, but was extremely attentive, an extremely good listener, understood people, and through that process he was able to be very helpful to me in mapping out relationships in the community and, again, thinking about strategy. Here in Nashville, I've only been here now maybe 2 months, but I have a terrific mix in our chairman here, Jeff Yarbrough. He's a very public person. He's a terrific speaker. He's very terrific on his feet. He's also a great strategist. The difference, I think, with between Jeff and the other two gentlemen I mentioned, particularly Dave Stackrow and Jack Brooks, but also Jim Cappiello, Jeff has very limited time. His full-time job is very structured, very demanding. He's also very active in the community. So for me, the important thing here is making the absolute best use of his time and making sure that the time we spend together is not on a lot of fluff or things that aren't of absolute crucial importance. And that's also an adjustment I think that we have to make as CEOs, is understanding that the level of commitment, not that a member wants to make to the organization, but frankly that they can afford to make to the organization based on their family, professional, and community commitments. Nat, I'd be kind of following up on that. I'd be very interested. You obviously have experience with a lot more chairs than I do, so I'd be very interested in those experiences.
Well, Steve, as you were talking, I look at the number of chairs that I've worked with over the years, and I think they also brought different styles to the table, and in my need to adapt to their styles, I think it had helped me become a better CEO in some cases. If I go back to the very beginning, it was, and I've had, I think you left off with the business leader, private sector business leader chair that, right to the point, give them the information, quick decision, and you're back to work and you're moving forward, to the, the board member who's much more, board chair who's much more detailed oriented and really wants to get into the nitty-gritty of decisions that are being made. And interestingly enough, I've had both of those extremes over the years. And what comes to mind is, I guess, about a year and a half after I became the CEO in Atlanta, relatively at a relatively young age, my chair was Ken Greger. And I think a lot of folks in the industry remember Ken Greger, who formerly served as the CEO of MARTA. His background was in finance. He came up on the finance side of the house and became general manager for a few years and then retired and came back on the board immediately upon my becoming CEO. He came onto the board and then later on became chair. And the important lesson that came out of that for me is that, here I had to adapt to leadership style in a board chair that was very detailed oriented and probably in some cases may have known a lot more about the organization and its inner workings than I did at that time. But it had some benefits. It really required a great deal of paying attention to detail on my behalf. I came up on the operations side of the house and from a developmental standpoint really was focused on making sure the trains and the buses were running on time every day and really focusing on what happened the last rush hour, so to speak. And so it really helped me, migrate and develop my skills in terms of the other side of the house related to the dollars and cents of the organization. And it was just prior to, I believe, 9/11 that he showed up as chair, and it helped me develop the strategy to really get our financial house in order and get ourselves through that financial downturn that occurred because of the tragedy that happened with 9/11. And so Ken Greger was a very focused, detail-oriented individual that I had to adapt my style to in terms of reporting to him. And in some cases, clearly, he knew a lot more about some of the organizations than I did. He still had the relationships with some of the staff, so I had to learn to win over the staff at MARTA because they had a lot of the individuals who worked for me had grown up under his tutelage. And so that was an interesting developmental opportunity for me. My next post, I was hired by a woman by the name of Cleopatra Vaughn in San Francisco. She was the chair of the San Francisco MTA, and Cleopatra was she was a hard charger. And I remember when I was hired by her, it was I think she was a committee of one in that particular case, because I traveled to San Francisco for the final interview. I had spoken with her and the city controller, and we had discussed the position, and I fly into San Francisco. I meet with the mayor. It seemed like a decision was made, and I found out later on that night I had to meet the rest of the board after the fact, and that made for an interesting introduction to San Francisco with a chair who was very, extremely supportive of my candidacy and my selection, and a board that may not have been right along with her with the decision-making process, and I had to work very hard to help them for them to feel comfortable with the selection that she apparently had made. Unfortunately, Cleopatra passed away about a year later, and that strong supporting chair that I had for the board was no longer present, and so I think it definitely, my point earlier about building that relationship and having a strong communication with not just the chair, but the entire board is important, because at a moment's glance, any one of those board members, at least it's been my experience, could be chair. And then finally, my current, well, not current chair, but the chair who was instrumental in my hiring here in Jacksonville is a gentleman by the name of Ed Burr, a very influential and successful business leader here in the Jacksonville community, and it was great coming in under his guiding hand. He literally, we were literally joined at the hip, and he took me throughout this community, introduced me to all of the right folks in appropriate fashion, and it quickly allowed me to learn the community and adapt to the culture here in Jacksonville. And those relationships that he initiated over, I guess, a year or so ago are breeding success even as we speak. And so, but his style was much the same as the last gentleman, Chair, you mentioned, Steve, which is one, you know, when I met with Ed Burr, it was probably once a month, if that much, maybe half a dozen phone calls during the course of the month, but one sit-down meeting prior to our board meeting, and he had a very free hand in terms of my leadership here, and just wanted me to bring back those very important issues that required his attention. And so very interesting when I look back at all of those different chairs and board members, but you know, our focus is on chairmen, and how their styles helped adapt and mold my leadership style of a transit agency or of authority. Well, I think as we kind of covered just chairs in general and some specific chairs, you know, there are some keys to success that, you know, I've implemented, I think, as it relates to just working with boards and working with chairs. And, you know, I think it's important to have strong communication with those with your chair, and the more structured that you can make that in terms of regular one-on-one meetings. My current board chair, I meet with her once a week. We have a 1-hour conference call, and if we can, we meet face-to-face for lunch or for dinner, and that has served us well. I think particularly as a chair who has just recently, I guess in the last year, taken over the chairmanship, and I'm the new CEO who's been around for about a year and a half. It was really important to have that intimate relationship and communication between the two of us, and it's helped us a great deal. Another thing that comes into play with communications is obviously the the meeting rules, or the sunshine rules, open meeting rules related to authorities in different states and different communities, they vary. And in my particular case, the sunshine laws here prohibit any of my board members from meeting, even as simply, whether it's on a subject regarding the authority or not, they have to notice it and in a public fashion, either through the newspaper or some other, or on the internet or on our website. And so a lot of the responsibility assuring that the chair, along with the rest of the board, are properly communicated with, all rests with me, and that is, something that I have not experienced before in the past, and it makes for a very unique situation. And so I think that relationship and communications for me has to be very well organized, and I go back to my relationship with the board secretary and her role in ensuring that I have the regularly scheduled meetings, regularly documented agenda, and the follow-up to those agenda items as a result of those meetings. And Steve, I'd just be curious as to, what are the keys to success you've had in terms of, chairman and communications and making sure you have that successful relationship?
Well, I think one of the key tenets I always try to subscribe to is that the chair, particularly bad news, he learns from me and not from the newspaper, an elected official, or what have you. Chair people that I've worked with have been terrific communicators, but they need to be communicated with in whatever style is appropriate, so adapting that style is critically important, as you mentioned earlier, Nat. And the fact that, there is that routine communication of things that just need to come to their attention. And I think the other thing is, and it really does speak to adapting our own styles as CEOs to the chairs that we have and to the board members that we have, is making sure we have an understanding of where they thrive and succeed in running the board. Are they best in the private meetings, and when do you call them into those? Are they best in those public events? How do they want to manage the board? And being very specific with them in terms of issues of board governance design and how the board moves forward as a group. So very interesting topic, probably no more important relationship in the in our formation as professionals. And also I'd like to highlight another thing you mentioned, Nat, which is always remember that any one of those members of the board that isn't the chair can become the chair, so making sure that you pay proper attention to those relationships, both for the current impact that they have on the board, but future impact as a chair, which is certainly a critically important position to the authority.